Knowledge for a better world. That is what we're aiming for. And the main questions today are why, when, and how can you as a researcher connect your work to the present and future needs of society? Welcome to today's Science Conversations at NTNU, and today's topic, Innovation and Impact. Unfortunately, due to illness, today's panel is not complete. However, I have still some very interesting persons here today with me. Solveig Klæbo Reitan, professor at the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences, not to forget. You're a professor in psychiatry, which means that you teach and you do research. You're also a medical specialist in psychiatry, which means that you treat patients. Anna Mölder, you are from the Department of Computer Science, a scientist who have worked in the intersection between computer science, engineering, and biology, and you hold several patents, if I'm not mistaken. And now you work as an innovation coordinator for artificial intelligence, nonetheless. I'm very happy that you both could be here with me today. So, in order for research and higher education to play a key role in making positive changes in society, what measures can you make to ensure that knowledge from research is actually used by someone?
I think the answer to that is a complete long lecture, but I can try to be brief. And I think you have to start before, you shouldn't start with your results and how can you implement them in society. You should start when you plan the project. What are you going to do research on? You should start with communication and dialogue with society, with the industry, with the schools, healthcare systems, worldwide, and find out what is needed. And then you can do the research, and I think that you have to have a continuous dialogue, and also when you have the final results, the final thing you want society to implement, you have to have not only communication, not only telling about your product, but you have to have a dialogue and understand what is it they need, and how can I adjust my product so that it is what they need. I think that is a main topic.
But this sounds very good, but how, like the financial structures, do they sort of match this? Are you allowed to think, okay, this is a need in society, we need to fix it, give me the money? Or do you have to sort of adjust the thought to financial structures?
Yeah, I think you have to do both, and you have to do more than that. But when you write an application for money for research, you always have to say whether this is needed, whether the results will have an impact. And also for more pure innovation projects, there is actually maybe at the moment more easy to get money to innovation than to research, both from the Norwegian research grants and also from the European Union grants. That is a possibility that is not fully used. So you don't get the money automatically, but it's not more difficult to get money for innovation than for research, I think.
Is that your experience as well?
Yes, I think that a lot of the applications that you send in today are more successful if you have a collaboration between several parties, and especially if you involved small companies, SMEs, and other businesses, you will have a much larger chance of getting funding. And also there are several types of funding which are specifically directed towards companies. So you have to have companies involved in your project from the start. But I think also for junior researchers, it's also important to think about when you start your PhD project, the tools that you develop, that you have an idea of how you're going to transfer this knowledge to someone else afterwards, so that you don't just write something for yourself, both in terms of code and documentation and tools, but to think a little bit about, if I'm going to hand this over to someone else, can I structure this in a format that will make it a little bit more readable? And if I can do that already from the start in my project and have that in the back of my head, then it saves a lot of time further down the line instead of rewriting the whole thing 2 years later.
And excuse me. Also, you mentioned companies, the industry, but I work mainly in the healthcare system sector, and there most projects actually are a collaboration between the hospital, the primary healthcare, other structures. That also is because we want patients, we want members of society to be a part of the research project. So that you already have involved the organization, the industry, the company, the healthcare system, the hospital into the project. And I think that's very important to get it implemented, that it is it is grounded in the organization the whole way through.
So the topic for today's conversation is innovation and impact. But what is impact? Could you help me define that?
You came up with the word. but I understand impact as that it has a meaning. It is important. And the definition of innovation is very, because you have similar words, but it is new, it is useful, and it is used. And the moment something new and useful is used, that has an impact. It matters. So the moment it matters, it involves a change and an improvement, then I think it is impact. But Anna may have another definition.
Yeah, you do.
It's very similar to what we think about in terms of any innovation. I think you can ask the question again about impact. Is impact for who and in what way? Because you can also do basic research and just publish things, and it also has a large impact. Only if people are reading it. It doesn't necessarily have to be a product. But when we define impacts in terms of in research applications, we usually try to talk about how this affect the rest of the society outside the academic world, I think, most of the time. So this is the usefulness is a very good definition of something that comes out, because you can come up with a lot of new things, but if you don't find your users and you get a continuous feedback from them, so that you can adjust your research along the line, then it's you can end up doing your own thing. And we all know that today's research, most successful research today, is done in collaboration with other people.
But so if you have a project, you have published a paper, 300 researchers worldwide say, great work. They've read it. Perhaps they've implemented something of it in their own research. But can you say it? And if it hasn't reached society, a broader society, can you still call it impact?
Yes, why not? I mean, the question is impact for who? As long as someone picks it up and can work further on it, then I think use it somehow.
We could talk about, because you mentioned basic research. But we can talk about direct impact if you make some new technology that is immediately applied in society. But you can also talk about indirect impact, because all the basic research is the base for other kinds of research that has a more direct impact. So we should. I think we'll get back to basic research later in the talk. But I think we can talk about impact there as well.
Yeah. But let's say, as a young researcher, you start out with a project. How do you know who you should target, who you could help with this information? I mean, perhaps they are not involved from the beginning. Do you have any experiences or thoughts on that?
Usually, of course, when you're a PhD, you get a project which is finished and prepared for you by your supervisor, and you get hired to start doing it. But it's a very good time to look into the background. I mean, what was the plan with the project, and familiarize yourself with what was the idea, of course. And this is something that you have to do in order to read up on state of the art. And this is maybe the first step you do as a PhD. But then your task is really to become an expert in your field and surpass your supervisor, preferably in knowledge in that area, after a year or two. hopefully.
And I want to add that if the supervisor has not written anything about the impact and potential for innovation and use for society, you should maybe, as a PhD student, challenge that. Because it has been a tradition that the impact factor of the journal was the important thing, and researchers should not gather too much with the ordinary people. But I think we have to, and young people have to challenge that and maybe ask the supervisor, what can we do? Can I go out and talk to people making roads, making computers, industry, healthcare systems, schools, whatever is the field of the project, and try and increase the impact of the project?
Let's not forget that you have a lot of freedom as a PhD. So you don't necessarily talk only to your supervisor, but also, I mean, go out there and talk to other people that you think could be useful for your project. That is really part of the job, really. Of course, it helps if you have a supervisor who can facilitate this dialogue and who has a good networking contacts already and who's very into innovation. But even if you don't have that, and you're interested in how your research is going to be used, so take advantage of that, of the fact that this is your task and your study project, really.
That maybe even should be a challenge that is given to all PhD students to try and develop and try and increase the impact of the project as a part of the research education.
Good idea. Anna, I think you mentioned it briefly, but does an innovation necessarily involve a project or a patent? Or could it be a process?
Yes, of course. Innovation is a very broad concept, and I realize that when I ask people in my institution what they think about an innovation is, I get very different answers. But many, as you say, think about patents, spin-off companies, and maybe licensing as the first thing that comes into their minds. But if we broaden the innovation to something that is new and used and made useful, if you go for that definition again, then you have something that is a lot broader. You can have, for instance, a better process for doing something, a standard operations manual that you're improving, but also to provide new knowledge in various ways. We live in a society of knowledge today, and how we know and use the tools that we have. This has more impact than the actual tools, I think. So if you can teach people about new ways to do things, that is also innovation, in a sense. I think that is also a topic for a very large discussion.
Yeah, but that is what people do all the time. They try and do their work better. And now we more talk about the innovation in services and how you do processes, both in schools, in police, in hospitals, all enormous large fields in society, which involves a lot of people and involves a lot of the money in society. People always have tried to do it better, better quality and more cost effective. And now we call this service innovation. And I think the principles are the same.
But I would think that in some form, all types of research is innovation in some form. But is it possible in this context to say that something is not innovation or innovative?
Yeah, continuing doing things the way they always have been done, not trying to do it better, that is not innovation.
But could you still publish in a high-impact journal? Is it possible?
I don't think I will answer that.
We have talked a bit about impact and a bit about innovation, but how is the relationship between these two? I mean, can you have innovation without impact and impact without innovation?
Well, it depends on who you ask. I mean, as again I say, impact for who? You can have impact only for yourself. Then, if you improve your own working process in some way, then in a creative, innovative way. I don't know how you do it as a student. If you just use different colors to color code your notes or something like that, and that if that helps you to study better, you've done something that is innovative. Of course, we can use it in that way, but the impact is very small. But it doesn't mean that it is less. So let's not make it a too small definition. When we talk about innovation, we can talk about various kinds of innovation. There is, as you said, you talked about spatial or incremental innovation in some sense. We also have, on the other end of the spectrum, you have maybe radical innovation, which is you take a big step, doing something that new, that really nobody has thought about before. And you also have various types of social innovation, and also service innovation that, like you were into also, that doesn't have anything to do with tools, but how you provide various types of services. So we can sort of split it down into various types if we want to. But I think that the important thing is to keep in mind this broader definition and of innovation as a whole. It's just an important concept and something that we do in research, whether we think we're doing it or not. I mean, there's a very
hopefully
close
within education as well.
Within education, yeah.
I mean, this becomes part of play again with words, but I think you can't say that it's innovation without impact, because without impact, that's not true innovation due to the definition. But the other way around, you can have impact on non-innovative things, and that may be very dangerous. So we also should have an eye on things that are very hard pushed onto us. Is this new? Is this useful? Is this something we need?
Solveig, you touched upon it already, but I'd like you to elaborate a little bit. What would you consider the most important steps to make if you want your knowledge from your research or innovations to be implemented?
Yeah, maybe I answered that in the beginning, perhaps, because I think you should not start, I have a product and I want it implemented. You should ideally start with what projects are needed, and then through the whole process, developing the project and doing the project, you should have constant dialogue with society, with the group you want to do something new for. So constant dialogue all the way there. And also, at the moment the result is finished, you should not only go and tell it, but you should ask, what is it you need, how do we have to adjust it, etc. In health research, no, we mostly need to have not only a partner in a hospital or outpatient clinic or something, we also need to have a user representative. To get money and to get started a project, user representatives, that is patients, also has to be involved in the project, and that would be the same with teachers and students in school research, etc. And I think that is partly to assure that you have a dialogue and that the product, the result, is of relevance for society. So there's a lot of joking about this user involvement, etc., but I think it's extremely important.
User involvement. We have some input from Professor Merete Tangstad. She works at the Department of Material Science and Engineering, and she's a part of an SFI, a Center for Research-Based Innovation, one of the national level tools for innovation and impact, you could say. Please go ahead, Merete.
Welcome to the Center for Research-Based Innovation within metal production. Metal production is a process where we are working with reactors that is more than 10 meters in diameters. This means that when we are talking about innovation, we are talking about innovation that will reduce the CO2 emissions and reduce the energy consumption and keep the Norwegian industry in the forefront. The impact is, of course, to keep a strong Norwegian industry and also to be in the forefront of environmental development. This will also have a big impact globally, as this will lead to improvements also outside of Norway. To have a center like this, it demands a strong cooperation between the industry and the academia. To get such a cooperation and to get a good network with the industry. One way to do this is, for example, to stay for a young researcher to stay in the industry a couple of months to see what the industry are working with and to understand their challenges.
Thank you, Merete. So Anna, Merete suggests letting PhDs stay a couple of months with industry. Have you experienced or know other methods for research groups to help their young researchers succeed with innovation and impact?
Well, having them doing some kind of study visit in the industries, of course, is a great idea, but it's not always possible. But in that case, you can still have a dialogue with your intended users by having networking or shared seminars throughout your project, of course. You mentioned healthcare, who has a requirement for you to actually have a dialogue with your users. But in many of the areas that we work in computer science, which is an enabling technology, then sometimes you don't actually know who your user is when you start the project. You just know that it can be used for a multitude of different things. And there you can have a little bit of work in front of you to figure out who is a potential user. And what you can do then is to go out a little bit broad and just share the contents of your project and what you think are the benefits and what your idea of the user is, and share that with a lot of people and see and ask for feedback and see who is interested in picking up on this. But once you have defined a specific user field on a specific implementation field, then I think it's a very good idea, like Merete said, to go a little bit deeper in with them and look at their problem more specifically.
So, like public outreach and the media may actually play a role here then, if you want to go out broadly with a message, this is what I'm doing, and help potential user groups to realize it.
Yes, it's an important part of your PhD project from the start is to practice presenting what you're doing in a kind of general sense, and you should start that as early as possible with conferences, etc. I should think, but of course it's also important to keep in mind the aspect that you might want to protect some of it. So have a dialogue with the supervisor sort of before you present, so that you present the right parts of it, so to speak.
Yeah. No, it's very clear now that we have two entrances to innovation, because I've talked a lot about there is a need in the healthcare system, in school, in society, and then we try and solve the problem. And you talk more about that you start with, you have something that you think will be very good and you make it, and then you try to find a market for it. And I think both entrances are necessary, but we have to be aware of whether is this sustainable. We have to think of how we use resources in society and at the university, etc. And that's a bit difficult, because you may end up with having produced a lot of things that there is no need for. Do you think it's a way to come over that?
It's a very important point that you're making, that you have those two different views, and there are some ways to finance projects that I've run into, which go it from your point of view, where you just place maybe a small team inside, for instance, a hospital or a governmental agency, and you look at the problem for a certain amount of months together with your clients, and then you try to come up with solutions. Most of the time in academia, it's done the other way around. You have maybe an idea for a solution, but you could also have an idea for basic research, and then you hire a PhD for this, and you come up with some kind of solution, and then you kind of sitting there wondering at the end, what are we going to use this for? This is still a common problem. I think that. I lost what I was going to say, almost. But in my department, it's more common that you end up having the problem that you talk about, that you don't know exactly who is going to use it, simply because we might have figured out a solution to one problem in one area, but the algorithm that we come up with is very general in sense that you have a feeling from the start that this is something that can be used in many different areas, but you don't know where. So it's actually a way that what I'm recommending is that we try to maybe expand the view a little bit and don't just try to solve the problem which is in front of you, but instead present what you have and see use it as inspiration for others. That we applied this AI algorithm to make this optimization problem smarter within logistics, for instance. But can you also use this in transportation or city planning, maybe?
Could you do that more efficient if you more regularly included other parts of society, non-academics, what we call user involvement, early in the project and maybe in the research groups?
So this is early involvement, I think, is the key to having good innovation within research. So in the project that we have today, we have an innovation part of the research project already from day one. And this is very, very important that we get this dialogue going at a very early stage. Because, as I said, if you wait until the last days of your PhD or your postdoc project, then you're sitting there with something and you think it's useful, but you don't really know the steps, how to take it forward. And this is something that takes a long time. So we need to respect that and start having the dialogue very, very early on.
So that you've both been saying that think impact from even before the project starts then. But even though it's basic research where you don't really know who the potential user group might be, but I guess that you can always also in basic research make it possible for the next generation of researchers to use that.
So maybe in very basic research, for example, in biology where I've been, the user representatives won't be potential patients out in society, but researchers doing research as something else that will apply this, for example. So I think working together with other professions, other parts, other institutes, other faculties at the university is crucial to really have a sustainable, efficient innovation at the university.
You don't have to be very targeted with who you present for, really. I mean, just decide that this is the contents of my projects and try to share it with as many people as possible, both internally and externally, I think, because you never know who's going to come up to you afterwards and ask you, this that you presented, I thought it was interesting, can we do this and this? And this is how you start like a new collaboration. Many successful research projects have started off with something like this. Yeah,
and I think that very many of the established researchers, supervisors, do not have that tradition and are very safe and comfortable in their group. So I think this is a challenge that the PhD students and young researchers have to take responsibility for.
But could actually innovation work be a hinder to a research career, you think?
I do not think it could be a hinder to a career. At the contrary, I think it is. I think research without a thought of innovation is a dead end. I think a lot of extremely clever researchers have done research at something, technical thing or some basic biology, etc. And then at the end, they have found fantastic results, but they have not been in dialogue with the next step of research, with the industry, with society, and then it is not applied. So for young researchers now, I think one of the most important things to make sure that you have a sustainable, long-lasting career is that you think of innovation all the time.
We have a video message from 2 PhD candidates at the Department of Mathematical Sciences. They have used another type of innovation and impact tool, or they're a part of it, a European training network gathering researchers and industry. Please go ahead.
Hello, I'm Elias Choka and I'm a second-year PhD student at the Department of Mathematical Sciences at NTNU. My PhD is part of a European training network called THREAD, which is a consortium of research organizations and industry that addresses mechanical modeling, mathematical formulations, and numerical methods for highly flexible slender structures like yarns, cables, hoses, or ropes. These are essential parts of high-performance engineering systems, and we address these fundamental modeling problems to better meet the needs of different industries. As early-stage researchers in THREAD, we benefit from close cooperation with industrial partner organizations, and we believe that this creates an optimal configuration for technology transfer and valorization of scientific research. I leave now the word to Andrea, another PhD student from NTNU in THREAD.
Hello, I'm Andrea Leone. I'm also an SR in THREAD and a PhD student at the Department of Mathematical Sciences at NTNU. As shown here, THREAD addresses 9 major industrial challenges in various fields. For example, Ergis and I will have a 3-month secondment at the industrial partner Technip FMC with a focus on offshore engineering. We also attended an industrial workshop organized by Leitner with demonstrations on wire rope reeving systems, and other workshops were organized by Flex Structures and Principia, with applications respectively to automotive industry and offshore wind turbines. In this way, we obtained experience from industry besides solid academic foundations. To conclude, we believe that the involvement of the industrial partners into the training activities of our PhDs help us to gain insight into both the current industrial applications and the related scientific challenges.
Thanks a lot. So they talk about a bit of the same things that you're mentioning, that to have sort of the users and the partners becoming a part of and a resource in the project. But so we have heard about, or not heard about, but mentioned at least, Centers for Research-Based Innovations that Merete Tangstad in the first video represents. We've heard about international training networks, as the 2 PhD candidates are a part of. And then we have innovation managers as another tool for innovation and impact at the university. Can you tell us a little bit about what that position entails?
Yes, it's a quite new position, and the goal has been to get a little bit more of innovation thinking and innovation experience into the university itself. Prior to this, NTNU has a lot of tools already for promoting innovation, but the people we're working with it have been sitting externally at the Technology Transfer Office, for instance. So this is a part of a long-term strategy to place a little bit more of this experience in-house and closer to the researchers. And the goal is the same, to get involved with innovation thinking and PhD students early in the project. And for this, it's very much beneficial if we can have people in the same building, hopefully in the same room, maybe, to just lower this threshold of that you don't have, as a new student, you don't have to go and find someone, that the people that you need to talk to, they're already there.
Solveig, how could one create a innovation, I don't know, culture in a research group?
I think there are 2 things. As I said, there are a lot of grants, and you have to make people aware that they can apply for all these innovation grants. That is one way. But mainly this is a matter, exactly as you say, about culture, and it is a responsibility of the leaders. The leaders of the research groups, of the institutes, have to ask for innovation and stress it. And then people will understand this is important.
And if the leaders don't, then it's the young researchers who have to sort of take
a revolution.
Yeah, a revolution.
Yeah,
nothing less.
But I think it's very difficult, because innovation is quite new, and there is a culture you have to change, and maybe not a revolution, but maybe. But there are a slow revolution, but this demand, for example, in in-house research, where there is a demand for user involvement, or with all these grants, etc., and with employing people in positions like you, and I think it is improving. I think that in 10 years, people won't they will, if people go away for 10 years, it will be something completely different when they come back. It will not be only pure research, isolated. It will be much more a focus on innovation in all research groups.
But I can already see a generation shift or a culture shift coming on, where specifically students already before, we're not talking about PhD students, but actual students before doing the masters are sometimes very, very interested in doing something, starting a spin-off company or doing something that would benefit society, so to speak. They're not necessarily focused on research as such, but as with research as a tool to make impact.
Both research and education altogether, because the reason why people go into university is because they want to do something, they want to make a difference for the world, and then that should be kept through the university and when they come out in the other end again.
But as if you're finished with your PhD degree or postdoc period, is there some sort of a list you should sort of be able to tick, or things you should know about innovation and impact?
I don't know whether that has been made up, but I think at least you should be open-minded to it, and you should be aware that innovation is an issue we have to deal with today, though maybe the older seniors in the field didn't think of that. You have to be aware of it.
So whether you want to work within academia or outside of academia after a PhD degree or a postdoc, so having the knowledge of innovative thinking and processes, I guess that would be a huge benefit. Have you seen examples of that?
There are a lot of knowledge that is directed towards innovation that you have used for in any area of society, also both in research and if you go outside in industry, and that is like knowledge of contract writing, for instance, knowledge of the patent, because whether you like patents or not, it is a tool that is used for sharing and economics, and how to make business plans, for instance, and how to start to think about your project in terms of something that could be commercialized is very useful. Is a useful skill for you, even if you decide not to go that way. So there are some things that are very good to learn, and if you are on a research project, then there is a project description already with an impact that your supervisor has probably been into from the start. So there is paperwork there that you can read about your own project. So, and if you don't get that from your supervisor, ask for it and read the project description, read the thoughts that was there, and have a look at the contracts, and just to see that it is not something that is dangerous to handle, so to speak. It's a tool if you go into business, and not be afraid of the paperwork there. That will help you to quicker become a senior researcher as well, because you will have to handle these tools.
Yeah, but there is also, I think, this can scare people as well. And you mentioned the Technology Transfer Organization, TTO, which is very helpful. So I think I would say to researchers, focus on your field, but you have to collaborate with people, and you also have to collaborate with people who knows the legislation, law, economics, contracts, etc. Ask for help.
Yeah, you don't
have to learn everything yourself.
No,
you just have to know that this is something that is important, and I have to go and ask for help.
You need to know that it exists, and approximately how to use it, and who to ask to get help to do it. But don't be afraid to learn about it. Definitely not.
But are there any defined, I don't know, tools or way to measure and evaluate impact?
We touched on that before. Ways to how to measure innovation and impact, and traditionally it's been done in the academic world by citations to your papers, for instance. That's a very common way to measure. And when you talked about hindrance to innovation, then having a very cemented view of what you should measure is something that can actually hinder innovation in a sense, because of course you can measure impact in so many other ways, and if you take only citations to your paper, then you will start focusing on maybe writing papers rather than to have this useful dialogue with your users. So we're trying to come up with from NTNU on on institutional level. We're trying to sort of infiltrate or implement more ways to measure innovation, of course, but you should also be open to find your own ways to present your research as an impact, really, because it's a grey field, really. It's very difficult to measure, and we could talk a long time about.
Have you any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think for money you have accountants, for publications you can read number of publications and the impact factor of the journals, but innovation is so new to us. It's a fast train when we are just jumping on it, and we have not thought so much about it, and we don't have a tradition for it. But my first idea is that maybe we should, some smart people should gather together and find some of these key performance indicators that you use other places. What can be key performance indicators for innovation at the university? Because we have to measure it in some way, otherwise people won't do it. And we don't know whether we are using money on useful things.
There is work like that ongoing, to mention, but that it's not spread around to the entire faculty yet. I know
it's a secret.
No, it's not a secret, but it's going on in working groups and involved in some of them. And so there is work coming, but we also want a dialogue with the faculty and with the students doing research also, and what is useful for you as an indicator, and how what is easy to measure as well, because you don't want to place the burden upon people to start measuring things instead of actually doing things. There's a balance between that's measuring and counting the score, and also keeping the ceiling high enough so that you can do things a little bit more ad hoc, and having a little bit more freedom.
But I was curious. You say there is work on putting down this. What can we measure?
On specific key performance indices.
Key performance indicators. Is that at the technology faculties? How is medicine and health science included? And what about the social sciences? Because innovation is needed there as well. You know anything about that?
It differs.
It differs, yeah.
What is important in one field may not be super important in others. So that's probably why academia has gotten stuck with this, like counting citations and counting impact factors of journals, because it's easy and everybody can use it.
Yeah.
But it's also a very, very blunt tool, actually, to measure innovation. So there we might need, may need a little bit of dynamics between different institutions on how to measure it.
So very interesting discussions, but we are approaching the end. So I wonder, do you have a take-home message to the audience?
Oh, yes. I think that most students have come into university and research because they want to do to change something, to have an impact, and they should keep that through studies and research, and that will involve innovation as well. So continue thinking why you started at university.
Keep that good idea with you. How about you, Anna?
And I think once you started doing research, you're automatically doing innovation as well. So keep that playfulness in mind when you're doing new projects, and don't be afraid to test new things, because when you're doing innovation, it is high risk, and there is no such thing as failing. There is just a better try that you can make next time.
Excellent. So go for it. Ask for help. Think about it throughout your academic life, and inside academia and outside of academia, and you can do it, is what I hear. Thank you to the panelists and those of you watching. I hope you've gotten some questions answered and some new ideas. We hope to see you back on May 12 for the next and last science conversations of the season. The topic is diversity and how it can improve research. And until then, keep the conversation going.